Thanks for taking the time to be here. My name is Alina, and I'm here to tell you about Ganesha's Terms, which is an interactive narrative about data economies to be played on browsers. This is our team. We're game makers and designers from the Game Center at NYU and Parsons. Together, we've created Ganesha's Terms to be a card-based allegory about privacy and consent for the everyday online user. Before we share with you this experience and what it looks like, I'll give you a little bit of context. Take a step back and imagine data. That's really hard, actually. What happens to our information online, as we've been seeing, is very difficult to access, and what's on either side of terms and services is even more of a challenge to know. Definitely, terms and services designed as legal protection for large companies rather than the end user in mind doesn't help. Also, the fact that a large economy branching out from the tiny pieces of our data is easier to represent in math and statistics, makes it fine for computing interface and harder for us. On the other hand, the creation myth of Ganesha happens to involve misinterpretation and privacy breach and has been around for a really long time. It's got clear actors and huge consequences that people can remember, which makes for a great analogy to talk about data and consent in broad strokes or detail, which I'll get to in a minute. As I said, it's been around for a while. In numbers, with 560 million users, India happens to be the second largest online market today. That's a lot of people who can relate to this story, and it's also great to improve representation of our media to the people that are part of it. Finally, card games, another really effective form to deal with vast economies and individual units. All of these are fantastic forms to internalize complex hierarchies that have been adapted and retold for a long time. This makes them the longest living forms of information technologies. So let's get into the meat of the story and how it applies to data applications. It starts really intimate in the middle of a goddess's bathwater. Once upon a time in the Himalayas, Parvati wanted some alone time. She's stepping into her bath, at which point her husband Shiva walks in totally unannounced. Parvati's angry. She figures it's time that she has her own guardian to protect her privacy. That's when she creates Ganesha from the turmeric paste of her bath. At this point, he has a human head, but it's going to go south. Let's look at how this parallel might happen on a really basic level in our card sets with data. The home of the gods, Mount Kailash, is an existential area of contention for the couple. For the goddess, it's an extension of her being. From the perspective of her husband, Shiva, it's a space of his domain, unquestioned. These are two perspectives and interpretations of one unit, Mount Kailash, data. From the story of a guardian child born of a privacy violation, this was a great space to start. I'll pass now over to Varun, who'll give you an example of how a user might interact with this in our demo. Varun, take it away.
Hi, yeah, so currently we have a prototype that features the first 2 chapters of the story. And we've tested this out with a few outside playtesters from our average online user demographic. And this footage has been sped up a bit to demo several aspects. But what you can see here is how players go about choosing cards based on partial sentences that they're given on the screen. And what they'll be doing is that they'll be selecting cards from this ring on the left to create a hand on the right. And then they click through this hand to find the correct order to fill up the blanks in the given sentence of the myth story. This will then reward them with a parallel of the myth in a data use case. If they choose an incorrect card, they receive negative feedback where the card flips over, informing them that their selection is wrong. And we also have a zooming in feature, which helps to look at enlarged versions of the cards. A clear button is also there on the top right corner, which allows players to clear out their hand at any moment to be able to start over if they made the wrong selections. And once players have complete one chapter's set of sentences, they'll be proceeding ahead to the next one, in which they'll repeat this process with increasing complexity of sentences and use cases of data conflicts. And yeah, now Jason will get into the research that was involved.
Jason, you're on mute. Building this prototype involved an exploration into both technical implementations and narrative analysis of both mythical and digital worlds. These are not naturally aligned topics. One is several millennia old, and the other is barely 50 years old. Paradoxically, this might be why it makes for a good fit in creating an analogy space for the story. To draw the analogies between those two worlds, we need to research the narrative of the data that we were actually producing. How did it move, and how did it get acted upon? We researched several analyses of data economies. Crack Labs networks of control is of particular note for this, in their articulation of the types of actions and actors that exist in the information economy. It's a comprehensive breakdown of specifically the exchanges and types of data that get used by corporations. With clear actors, we set about picking out common phrases and expressions that showed up in the data and mythic stories. We combined myth verbs like prayer, follows, orders, with data verbs like uses, access, and permits, and as well as matched characters. We made the relationships that sort of made sense to us. We used these then to create cards that would be in the game. These would have the characters' names as well as their corresponding representation in our data world. Here you can see some of the art and the division between the verbs and characters. And with the cards metaphorically in hand, we started to create the actual sentences that certain configurations of cards would link to. For this exercise and prototype, we mostly wanted to test our card technical system. We have sentences that can be organized and written together as matching sets. These are things that you see in the prototype itself. We have available sentences of varying complexities, from card needing only a card pair to needing something resembling more like a poker hand, something like 5 cards. A major key here was the ability to author these sentences smoothly for game creation. And with the smooth development and prototyping pipeline, it helps us work towards creating this sort of escalation. Our users are able to discover how the story itself builds. By using and interacting with the cards, our audience can find the reoccurring characters and actors within both of these narratives. They can find through the cards which parties are responsible for which types of action. They journey through the conflict escalation, and our audience will see how actors in both myth and data stories repeat and change through that overlapping space. That overlap becomes the analogies that they can discover through playing with the toy, and then the knowledge that we provide them through those relationships is what they keep with them.
So our next steps, they're twofold. First, it's integrating this full range of examples that Jason was talking about from small to large scale into our structure. There are examples like Uber using location data to change the price of your ride, or India's national fight with Facebook's free basics over net neutrality. Beyond that, it's also ensuring that we have this book feature here to store the individual sentences of the myth and data stories face-to-face, which helps users step back from the details while they're playing and internalize the connections and parallels as they play across the 3 chapters as the epic drama unfolds. Our card game narrative finishes with a question. In the myth, the story ends surprisingly well. Sure, Shiva beheads the child Ganesha in his rage at being locked out of his house. And yes, his wife Parvati does threaten to destroy all creation. But then the god Brahma guides the couple to a compromise. Ganesha is reborn as a higher being with an elephant head to replace the old one, and the family year reunites. In our real world, we're not really there. We're in the midst of the privacy wars. We haven't found the elephant head or the guide to remove our problems yet. The good news is that we're getting a better understanding that consent and control are not a moment and a process, and that much of this struggle isn't new. Many sides are working on it. What can we all get out of this? Using cards and stories can help us assemble and keep track of complicated systems. They can also be a tool to start imagining solutions differently. Technologies from thousands of years ago and today can be merged. The more perspectives are involved in the search, the more we can try. Thank you very much.